Two years on, and the Russian invasion of Ukraine shows no sign of ending. The humanitarian disaster unfolding in its wake is now the most important work for the court charity, the Greater Chernobyl Cause. Director Fiona Corcoran, with nearly 30 years' experience in the country, feels compelled to visit for the first time since the outbreak of war. It involves a challenging road journey, seeing projects and conditions on the ground for herself. Phone warnings of impending air raids across the country come as an early shock. Fortunately, this border region is unaffected, at least at this time.
Well, we've just arrived in Ukraine over the border, and a mixed bag of emotions at the moment. Very happy to be here, but of course fearful. And if I'm afraid, I think of our people on the ground who have suffered so much, and the carnage right throughout Ukraine. And coming through the border, we're alerted to the air raids that are continuing right throughout the country. And we're bringing aid to our people in Kharkiv and our people in Kiev and various parts of the country. And of course, I am afraid and frightened. But my fear is for the people who are still here 2 years later, and this horrific war continues against Ukraine.
Lviv buries and honours its dead in its war cemetery, a painful and very vivid reminder of the cruelty of this war and the horrifying death toll that seems only to grow and grow as the conflict drags on.
So handsome, so beautiful.
Attention, air ranger. Proceed to the nearest shelter. Don't be careless. Your overconfidence is your weakness. Attention.
Completely overwhelmed to see, these young, innocent boys, 19 years old, 18 years old, 22 years old, meeting the mom and the aunt of that little boy who passed, 22, and there's fathers, grandfathers, uncles, brothers. It's just, and the enormity, the amount of graves. And it's the scale, isn't it? It's the scale of the devastation of the war. It's just...
The railway station in Lviv, in the country's far west. At the start of the war, it provided a vital escape route for the millions who fled the conflict with their lives and few possessions. Charities worldwide did their best to help with this overwhelming tide of desperate humanity.
And millions of people left their bombarded homes and cities, children, mothers, grandparents and the infirm. They arrived here in Lviv, and again tumbling down these steps, And here organisations like ourselves were able to provide accommodation, food, medical intervention, counselling, and then transport on the way to different countries to find sanctuary and safety. Many of these people are now refugees in our country in Ireland, which we support.
Also in Lviv, a brand new van donated by the charity waits to be loaded with aid for embattled communities. Amongst the staples like bed linen and pillows, toothbrushes and toiletries is cutting equipment to help the rescue services in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city, now under constant Russian attack. A city that Fiona knows well from her many previous projects in Ukraine.
The base of the bed is simply, it's a rough, worn, rusty coil, which is almost collapsed at the moment. And then we've got the mattress, which seems to be like an eiderdown sewn into some material. And it's obviously very uncomfortable for the children to sleep in. There are 56 children in the hospital. We must replace all of the beds because I think the children are suffering enough with TB and their other illnesses.
A place she cannot forget, but one she cannot visit, as she has been advised that it's now far too dangerous. Grim landmarks on the way to Fiona's next destination. Borodyanka, a mere 50 kilometers from the capital Kiev, was an early and shocking casualty of the first Russian onslaught. Signs later, too, of the Ukrainian resistance that liberated the region from the oppressors. A strong community spirit and hopes for renewal and reconstruction are uniting villagers in Kukari. That's despite their community being largely destroyed under Russian occupation in the early stages of the war. Here, many people lost everything, their lives shattered, much like their homes.
І ми дуже хочемо почути ваші історії, нам дуже цікаво.
And it's horrific, it's actually horrific what you people have
Це жахливо, через що ви пройшли.
You must tell us your needs.
Тому, будь ласка, розкажіть нам, через що ви проходили, що ви переживаєте, що вам потрібно.
And it's important that you share your stories with
Це
us.
важливо,
Please.
важливо нам почути вашу історію і далі нести цю історію.
Тут був вхід, бо тут був один.
This was the entrance to my home. There were 2 barns, a garage, and a house where we lived. It was March 19 when this happened. I walked outside and saw several Ukrainian soldiers running towards my basement, which they used as a bomb shelter. A bomb dropped into my front garden that minute. The conservatory collapsed instantly and the window frames were blown out. The house was brick-made and it literally all caved in. The soldiers were crushed under the weight of the house. I survived on the floor above but was injured.
Ну, 2 достали живих, а одного вже не живого.
Ну, тяжко, звичайно, тяжко, тому що життя не таке, як було.
It is very challenging. Life is not the same. The house is not the same. Emotionally and psychologically, we feel different. Our social position has changed with much less job opportunities. It is very difficult, of course, but the hardest thing is losing a home. We do have a roof over our heads, living in a modular home, but it is very cramped for a large family.
Дах над головою є, в нас є вагончик. Ну, місця дуже мало.
Ну він бабник уже ходить по вулицям.
А от дружніч?
Десь дуже бігає на вулиці.
Є смачно.
Я мотивував пишу.
Hello. Привет. Hello. How are you? Good. Fiona. How are you?
Погано чують.
A chance to add to badly needed supplies as life here returns to something resembling normality. What could have been further from any idea of care for the elderly than being trapped inside your nursing home by invading Russian troops? That was the crisis here 2 years ago in Pribisk. Of the 30 residents, 15 are bedridden.
This is a place for people who cannot look after themselves, the bedridden and those with disabilities. A place for those who need constant care around the clock.
Добова допомога.
We're quite saddened to see that there are 30 people living there, 15 people bedridden. So the urgent need that we must supply is 15 specialised beds. And we're speaking about wheelchairs for bathing people. And then very important also is a dishwasher, because 30 people and everything is being washed by hand. We need a water filtering system, we need an industrial wheel hoover, and simple things like pull-ups as in adult nappies, because again, think of the people who are laying in the beds every single day. I look at the facility where my late mom had been, and the care, the compassion, the empathy was absolutely wonderful. I was able to visit my mum every single day, but unfortunately these people don't have families. One particular lady discussed about her daughter who passed about 7 years ago, and her grandchildren, they don't come and visit. So we need to urgently start some kind of visitation programme with the local community becoming involved.
There's an odd silence now at Father's house outside Kyiv. Because of the continuing war, over 100 children have now been evacuated to safety in Germany from the treasured place they called their home. Safety was a major concern here during the early stages of the war, as bombs and missiles rained down on Kyiv. Fortunately, the Greater Chernobyl cause was able to offer support in finding a solution.
When Mikola from Father's house contacted me and said that they didn't have a bomb shelter, and there were so many air raids in the area at the time, and they urgently needed a shelter, of course, for the residents of Father's house, but for the young women and children living in this village, we realised, for their safety, we had to jump into action immediately, and support them.
All this a very marked contrast from when Fiona visited last in 2005. She was here to see the transformational work of a charity working with and rehabilitating homeless, orphaned and abused children in a wholesome and loving family atmosphere. While the war rages, Father's House will design and start imaginative outreach projects for adults and children affected by the war. The magnificent capital that the Russians thought they could conquer so easily remains defiant after 2 years of war. It's a conflict Fiona now understands more clearly, having seen the stark effects of war for herself. She's heard at first hand from those who have suffered and those determined to keep their nation safe and independent.
We're here today in central Kiev. It's quite difficult to believe that there's a war. I felt quite safe during my aid trip. The only time I had fear was when we would hear the sirens of the air raids and would have to go to the basements or the bomb shelters, thinking what life was like here, let's say last year or 16 months ago, when the people were brutalized. Being on the ground here in Ukraine, it's great to see the fruition of some of our projects. Really important one was the purchase of our combi van, and it was enabling us to travel to various parts of Ukraine carrying vital humanitarian aid for our homes for the elderly and for orphanages and for care centres, to see the bomb shelter that we were able to purchase, but also to see the great needs that's required by the different organisations, and simple things like walking aids and hospital beds and food and nappies for elderly people. So there's a desperate need for support here. And of course we're going to give 100%, as we always do, seeking, let's say, like finance for these desperate people who are basically forgotten.
If you have been moved by the courageous work of the charity, then please respond to our heartfelt appeal. Your contribution, no matter how large or small, will make a significant difference to the lives of those trapped in the unspeakable horror of this war. Thank you.